You are listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast with Buck Joffrey. Get ready to change your life.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with the Wealth Formula Podcast. And before we begin, I would like to remind you that there is a website called wealthformula.com that you need to check out so that you can access an abundance of different kinds of resources available to you on wealthformula.com that are not available simply by listening to this podcast. In addition to that, I have an idea for you. If you're thinking about potentially getting a gift for your friends and family, and you think, you know what, this person is a little bit financially not adequate, then you might consider giving them the gift of the Wealth Formula Network. Basically, the idea here is the Wealth Formula Network is a private community of Wealth Formula. And when you sign up for the course, the Wealth Formula Roadmap, then you get to take the course and also be part of the private community. And that private community consists of several very, very smart people. Well, they're like, everybody's smart. Everybody has variable backgrounds in terms of experience, but everybody gets to that point of becoming very competent in financial literacy. And anyway, we do that by, in addition to having this course, which has, the likes of Tom Wheelwright, Ken McElroy, and a bunch of very smart people on it, there is a bi-weekly Zoom video call, and we do sort of an open-ended Q&A and discussions about a lot of in-depth stuff, sort of like these Ask Buck podcasts that we've been doing, except, you're on the spot asking the questions and getting feedback, and not just from me, but from others in the group. Anyway, if that sounds interesting to you, it could make a good Christmas present. Go to wealthformularoadmap.com. Now, speaking of Christmas presents, I have another idea for you if you're struggling to find the right Christmas present for your loved ones this year. Here is a general suggestion. Focus on the concept of experience, experience rather than some tangible thing. So last week, I snuck my 10-year-old daughter Camilla out of school and drove her down to Los Angeles to be part of a live studio audience. And it was for a show. It's her favorite show on Nickelodeon called All That. For those of you who are not familiar, All That is sort of like a kid's Saturday Night Live. In fact, I think some of the kids in there have fed into Saturday Night Live. And frankly, it's actually, in some regards, it might even be better than Saturday Night Live, because Saturday Night Live so often relies on, dirty jokes and things like that. It's just cheaper stuff, but these kids are actually funny. I realized that when I went. Anyway, we go to this show. It's in Burbank, actually. And we, stood in line for a bit and stuff. But when we got in, my daughter was on cloud nine. The whole show, we were there for like 5 hours. This is a shooting for a 1 hour show, but they just keep taking cut after cut after cut. She got to go in, she got chosen to be one of the kids who went into the front, for the live music act. And she got to be on TV basically. She saw her favorite child stars. She even got to fives. It was a big day. Afterwards, she called it the most exciting day of her life. It was literally shaking when she got out of there. It was super cute. And I was just kind of overwhelmed by what this had done for her. And she was thanking me profusely. She was like, "Thank you, Daddy." She couldn't stop talking about the show for literally the next 2 days. She couldn't stop talking about it. And frankly, I'm quite sure that she will never, ever forget that day. That's, it reminds me of the first time I ever went to an NHL hockey game when I was a kid with the North Stars, when they were a Minnesota team, not a Dallas team. And what a big deal it was for me. And I still remember, so much of that day and all the things that went in. And that's what this is going to be for her, which is amazing, right? On the other hand, I pretty much guarantee you that even though that she will never forget that day, that she's going to forget a lot of the stuff that I end up getting her for Christmas, probably within, I don't know, a few days. It's just a reality. It's not going to keep me from getting her some stuff. But stuff, generally speaking, doesn't last. Memories do. The stuff that I'm going to get her will also cost me a lot more than this experience did. In this particular situation, I didn't know this, but being part of the live studio audience, all this stuff, it was free. I mean, basically all I had to do was to go on the internet and, print off some vouchers. Did have to stand in a line for a little bit. But that site, by the way, if you're interested, because there's lots of interesting stuff, we may end up going back again for some other stuff just for fun, that site is on-camera-audiences.com. Again, that's on-camera-audiences.com. And then they have like this full listing of different shows and stuff that you can see. Some of them will be more, adult stuff, and some of them's for kids and stuff like that. Anyway, it's kind of fun. Now, of course, this kind of thing, this sort of going to live studio, seeing comedy, live comedy and stuff. It's not for everyone. In fact, my 7-year-old and I, Camilla's my 10-year-old. She went to that, but my 7-year-old Cosmo and I are going to go to a Vikings game this coming week, which is her thing. She's big into football, and she doesn't remember ever going to a live football game, although she went to one when she was a baby. Anyway, she's that's her thing right now. That one's not cheap, obviously. That said, the general idea of your experiences over stuff is a good one, and I have been trying to implement it into my gift giving as much as possible. Anyway, that's sort of, not really financial stuff, but I got to tell you, it helps you. If it helps you with a gift idea or two this season, then hey, hopefully I can help out. Anyway, speaking of the gift that keeps on giving, today, and this episode marks the third week in a row of Ask Buck. Admittedly, I was a little hesitant about releasing this week because, again, it's the third week of Ask Buck, but I've actually been getting a lot of emails from you saying that, that you've actually really enjoyed these episodes. So that's good. I'm glad to hear it. So that makes me feel better about finishing this tranche of questions that we have built up over time. By the way, if you have questions for a future Ask Buck show, make sure to go to wealthformula.com. And, you can see at the top, it basically says Ask Buck a question. And, you can record a question, or you can just email me on Ask Buck too. Some of these questions that we answer or we discuss during these shows might have actually triggered more questions for you. So while it's fresh, make sure you do that. By the way, I do prefer those recorded questions more because it just, it feels more personal, but either way is fine. So that is what we're up to this week. And when we come back, episode number 3 of Ask Buck. Welcome back to the show, everyone. So this is the third and final round of Ask Buck, at least for probably the next couple of months, right? Glad you have enjoyed it. At least that's what the feedback I'm getting is. Initially, I was like hesitant about doing a third show, but the reality is I'm getting a bunch of these emails with people telling me that they like this format and that they're learning a lot. And so I think the moral story here is that, we do a lot of podcasts, right? We do a lot of podcasts. We talk to a lot of people, and once in a while it's nice to do sort of one of these 360s, or would it be a 180? Anyway, of looking back at, a plethora of information that we've already kind of gone through, and, just start to put things together. And, there's some real practical questions that come out of these things that we don't always assess. It's another reason, by the way, that if you enjoy this format, you really should consider joining the Wealth Formula Network, because this is sort of the Q&A thing that this is what we kind of do basically in our online private community, Wealth Formula Network. It starts with a course, of course, and then, but really the most of the time is spent The real value I think that most people are really excited about is the biweekly Zoom video phone calls that we have. Check that out, wealthformula roadmap.com. Anyway, just a quick plug there. And hey, maybe it's a nice Christmas gift to somebody. That's not a bad idea, right? Maybe you're just thinking, well, maybe what am I going to get such and such, and maybe they need to get a little smarter financially or something like that. Okay, so let's get on with the questions today. One question, the first question, just like last time, I'm going to start with a generic question that I've been getting a fair amount of within the investor club, which I think deserves some significant and legitimate attention to. And that question is generic in that effectively it surrounds the concept of conservation easements. What are they exactly? Are they, dangerous from the standpoint of, violating laws and things like that? So let me kind of back up and tell you what this is. Okay. So conservation easements it's an old law. I don't know the entire history of it offhand, but basically allows people to take, large parcels of land they own. It's like farmland or, whatever it is. And, with each piece of land that you own, you have certain rights. You have land rights, mineral rights, blah, 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 all this other stuff that, if you've gone through any sort of real estate course in the past, you probably have heard of. But effectively, what conservation easements are is it's basically it's a way for a landowner to effectively commit to preserving that land from building or mining or drilling or whatever in perpetuity. And by designating a space as a conservation easement, they get certain tax benefits. Now, those tax benefits can be pretty profound. So, and they're based on, a valuation of what the after mining or after building value of that piece of land would be. So, for example, say there's a piece of land, and, we're usually talking about thousands of acres at a time. We're not talking about like, I've got an acre here and I want to do something with it. So let's say Ted Turner, for example, owns, 500,000 acres somewhere, and he's got buffalo roaming on there. And he's like, you know what? I use this for buffalo, but I'm not really gonna, I'm not gonna build anything. I'm not gonna put like a big tower here. I'm not going to drill for minerals and stuff. I'm going to dedicate this to a conservation easement. So now, if he does that and he gets a valuation of that land, and the valuation says, man, if you had built a gigantic resort here, and if you drilled and mined over here, this land would be worth XXX amount. In theory, that amount, that theoretical amount, is what is used as a deduction if the conservation easement election is made. Okay? Not what he paid for the land, but what the land could be theoretically worth upon this dedication to conservation easement. So, in other words, you could have a situation where a land is purchased for let's say $1, and the valuation that it gets is $5 or $6. So in that situation, if it is elected as a conservation easement, then what will end up happening is the deduction is not for the $1 paid for the land, but for the $5 or $6 that the valuation comes into. So as you can imagine, that's an enormous deduction. So if you're talking about 5, 6, 7, whatever it is, it's leveraged giving. So it is a tremendously powerful tax benefit. Now, here's the catch, right? So people have been doing this for a long time. It was made for farmers, and farmers do it. And, it's a great deal for farmers or people who own land that they have no intention of building on, because you're basically saying, hey, I mean, I'm not really intending to build or, drill on this land anyway. I'm just going to keep farming, or I'm just going to keep my horses there. And yeah, I'm going to do this and take my huge deduction, just by saying for sure I'm going to preserve this land for good. This land is preserved for good. So the controversy, as people have heard about, comes to the fact that most people don't have 100,000 acres to do this kind of conservation easement, right? So what do we do historically? What have we done when we can't afford something on our own, but we still want to get involved? Well, we participate in syndications. Okay. So the controversy in this area revolves around the idea of conservation easements that are syndicated. They're not just like one farmer saying, I've got a whole bunch of, I've got 100 acres here and I want to do this. It's like a bunch of investors getting together like they would on any development project and then making an election for a conservation easement. So the controversy is really around those syndicated things. And really, here's the controversy, right? I mean, because clearly that was not the intention of the law, of having like all these individuals getting into syndications to do conservation easements. But on the other hand, I will argue, and again, I'm not an attorney and I'm not giving you advice, that you're not breaking the law, because there's nothing inherently wrong with participation in a syndication. There's no laws that say you can't do it. And what's the difference between one individual, having land and dedicating it versus syndicated land and dedicating it? So that's where the controversy is. Now, the reality is that the IRS hates syndicated conservation easements. Okay? They hate them. But here's the thing, is the IRS doesn't make laws. Congress makes laws. And right now, conservation easements and, syndicated conservation easements, everything that we do are legal. So what ends up happening is every year at the end of the year, the IRS ends up sending out these like, oh, we're going to investigate such and such, and we're going to be harsh on this. And they might, I don't know. I'm not saying they're not, but I'm just telling you that every year they do the same thing. And I think a lot of people think, well, they're basically blowing smoke here because they can't really do a whole lot if things are being done legally. So they're just throwing out these warnings to people, don't participate, because they don't want you to participate. Fundamentally, the issue to me is that until Congress makes it illegal or puts some certain additional limitations to this, is really up to you. I will tell you that, I have participated in these things. And furthermore, I have been audited, not because of the easements that I participated in, but because of anybody who makes a decent amount of money, eventually they're going to have some audits, and a lot, especially if you have a bunch of business activities like I do. Anyway, I'll tell you, in those situations, what's happened is I participated with groups that dotted their I's and crossed their T's, and they gave me all the paperwork that I needed, and I presented those as part of the audit. And guess what? Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Right? Not to mention, if something were, going to happen with anything related to your conservation easement, it wouldn't be at your level. It wouldn't be at the limited partner level. You just have a K1. For the thing to be challenged at all, it needs to be charged at the general partner level. So bottom line is, this is a complex issue. It's an issue that I have decided personally that I feel like I'm going to follow the law. I'm not going to follow the fear. And because the worst case scenario, in my opinion, and the opinion of some smart people that I know, is there could be a decrease potentially in valuation over a period of time, in which case the potential downside turns into, okay, potentially you may have to pay up a little bit of money later but by that point, you've already doubled the money that you saved, that kind of thing. Anyway, I'm not going to tell you to do this. I'm not going to tell you not to do this, but I think the things that you read about, I think you just got to be smart and understand there's law, and then there's different branches of government, there's different parts of government, there's the IRS, there's the Congress. Try to be rational about that, and know that if you're not doing anything illegal, you should be just fine. That's my opinion. That's not advice. Okay, so let me get to the first question from a discreet person, and that is Eric Harmlin. He says, Buck, what assets or investments other than owning real estate would you feel comfortable with to produce consistent cash flow? Well, here's the thing. Owning real estate equity is my favorite cash flow play because of the tax advantages upside, which I've probably talked about numerous occasions throughout these last few episodes. But if you don't care about the tax advantages and are looking for stable cash flow, there are other options that might be relatively stable. Now, specifically, we talked earlier about first liens on real estate, and I think that's certainly a way to do it. First liens on real estate, especially if it is, if you want to, if you're loaning out money, just make sure that there's loan to value is significant, and that you don't get, screwed because all the markets went south and all of a sudden you're holding property that's significantly devalued. And I will say also that even non-performing debt in the right hands, like AHP servicing, might be a good option because in those situations, those kinds of funds benefit from a down economy. And as I've said before, I am, comfortable with George Newberry's, role at AHP servicing and his ability to perform. So that's something. However, there are other ways to, do this kind of lending that don't involve real estate. And that's another thing to think about. And it actually might make sense if if all you have is real estate, it might make sense to have collateral outside of the real estate markets if your primary investments are really all real estate related. So in the past, within Investor Club, we have presented opportunities for lending, even with oil and gas drilling equipment as collateral. So if you have a really big company, that might honestly be a pretty safe bet because you've got you've got a company with all this heavy duty equipment. I mean, effectively it becomes almost like a, reasonably high rated bond in that situation. The big thing, honestly, with all of these things that we're talking about, is not a specific thing, right? I mean, notes in one person's hands are very stable and in others they're not, So the big thing with all this is to understand the underlying asset or fund and feel comfortable with it, right? Because not all real estate is created the same, nor the people who operate it, Not all debt is the same, and the people who operate those funds are of varied skill sets as well. And so we've got to get out of this mindset of, our note safe or is real estate safe, and understand that, in this space, in this alternative space that we live in, it is all about the operator. It's all about the operations. It is not so much about the asset. And that makes it very good if you're in the right hands, right? Anybody can take something that is a really good asset, turn it into a lousy one by not operating it well. Now, if you're in a credit investor, you're probably seeing some of these things that I'm talking about coming by. But if you don't, certainly join, and then you are accredited, then join the accredited investor group at wealthformula.com. Go to Investor Club. All right, next question is from Jason.
Buck, this is Jason Beck from Little Rock, Arkansas again. Wanted to get some feedback from you on oil and gas investments. I know you've had some recent webinars on that and covered that topic some. As we approach year's end, I think a lot of us are going to be looking at active taxable income that we would like to find some advantage on. And wanted to see what your overall take on the oil and gas investments was. Get some feedback on that from the group. Thanks.
Good question, Jason. And, the end of the year here, right? I mean, this is really the going back to, if you're a high paid W-2 investor, you have active income, you don't have a lot of ways to write off money against your wages and get a return. As we've talked about before, I mean, one of the things that you can potentially do is conservation easements, but again, they are not without controversy. And then, of course, there's no planned return on that. It's basically a one and done. Oil and gas investments, on the other hand, are not controversial at all, in the sense that the government actually loves for you to do them, and there is no, there's no nobody saying otherwise. The reality is that the IRS has made this, the Congress has made this an initiative to keep dependence on foreign oil to a minimum, and the fact that the tax benefits are so compelling is what's ultimately led the U.S. to become the number one oil exporter in the world. And that's why, my CPA and yours, I know Tom Wheelwright, calls the tax code a series of incentives, right? If you do what the government wants you to do, you will likely save on taxes. That's the bottom line. So with oil and gas, because bonus depreciation right now, in many cases, you'll be able to write off the full amount of your investment against any income, including W-2 income, which is what most high-paid professionals get. So in other words, say you make $500,000 per year of active income and you invest $100,000 into oil and gas. You'll get taxed on $400,000 instead of $500,000 because you basically knocked that off. You deducted that off your top line. And then the cash flow you get from the oil and gas drilling will also have some tax shelter to it. I believe it's something like 15% of the cash flows. So just from your investment in this scenario, right, of $100,000, if you're in the highest tax bracket, you would have saved probably about, at least $40,000. In other words, 40% return on investment immediately, right? So when you hear that, and of course, and you're hearing this for the first time, or you're new to this, the idea, you say, gosh, what's not to love? In theory, I would tell you that I couldn't agree more, but the devil is in the details. Just like anything else, we go back to the idea of operators. We talk about, who's going to actually drive these assets to profitability, right? So first of all, drilling for oil is inherently riskier, as you can imagine, than something like real estate, right? Just think about it. I mean, what are you doing? You're basically, you're taking a, obviously there's ways to significantly improve that technology now, but I mean, if there's no oil, there's no money. The next issue is that this oil and gas space, I have to tell you, and this is very true, and Tom Wheelwright will tell you the same thing, is there, this is an area that's full of charlatans and people who are happy to take your money, slap on a bunch of fees, and hey, give it a shot with a drill, right? If they get lucky, then everyone wins. Everybody makes money. If they don't, they still win with the fees that they slapped on, and they didn't have a bunch of money that they lost themselves. So it's not a bad deal for them either. And the reality is that describes the majority of the operators I've worked with, or at least that I've tried to vet in this space. It's not a pretty group. Now, that's not to say that, there's not some good ones. We just had a presentation, as you know, with an investor club for accredited investors with a group that I do think is legitimate. And one of the things that I really like about that group in particular was they were investing the operators on 50% of the capital that was going into these. 50% of the equity that was going into the fund was from the operator themselves, right? And that tells me that the group is trying to make money by actually finding oil, not by just racking up the fees. So if I was going to invest in oil and gas myself, as I have done in the past when I actually had more of an active income, more of an issue, that's the kind of group I would look for. And in the reality, I mean, I do have active income. That said, I happen to be a real estate professional. So I get all the same benefits from investing in real estate, basically, because depreciation can be used to write off all my sources of income, including active sources. So listen, real estate at the end of the day, definitely less risky, and I understand it very well. So for me, it's a no-brainer. But if I had a bunch of active income and I didn't have the real estate professional designation, I would certainly consider oil and gas with the right group. And but the right group is the key, is absolutely the key. I can't even tell you, that's sort of the theme so far in this podcast. Is it's not just the asset, it's not just a building, it's not just notes, right? This isn't like going to Ameritrade and investing in Apple stock per se, because there's only one kind of Apple stock. If you invest in oil and gas, you have all sorts of different operators out there, and you got to pick one that gives you the highest chance of success. Okay, next question is from Josh.
Hey, Buck. I wanted to take a minute to thank you and your guests on your podcast for sharing the information you do, because I really learned a lot. I appreciate that. I also wanted to ask a question regarding Roth IRAs. I have a Roth IRA that is basically sitting in a brokerage fund or a brokerage account. I can't really contribute more because of my income, and so I'm considering cashing it out and putting it towards a syndication deal. My question is, I've considered putting it towards the deal, or putting it into a wealth formula banking account, and I guess I'm wrestling with what I should do there, and whether it makes sense to just go straight into a deal or put it into a wealth formula banking account. So I'm curious on your thoughts on that. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Josh. So for those who are unclear about Josh's question, I don't think he's talking here about simply choosing between two different potential investments, which is, either a syndication or wealth formula banking. What he's asking is if you should put the money in a wealth formula banking policy first and then borrow from it. So why would he do that? Well, let's review. The idea is that wealth formula banking, with that, he would start getting a 5% or better compounding rate on his cash value. And he'd start getting that. And in as little as a couple of months, he could turn around and borrow the cash value within that account and redeploy it into a real estate investment, right? So you might ask why. Well, Josh knows, I guess, from the question, you can tell that borrowing from his cash value is actually not borrowing from his own cash value. What he's doing when he borrows money from wealth formula banking is that he's borrowing money from the insurance company general account, and they're using his money and his cash value as collateral. Why is that important? Because his money is growing at a compounding rate in his cash value account, but when he borrows from the insurance company, he is borrowing at a simple interest rate. And when he does that, it effectively he's growing capital in two places at the same time if he then goes and deploys that simple rate capital into something else that's growing at a higher rate. He's using the loan as arbitrage, essentially, to juice up other investments. So it's a strategy we talk a lot about. A lot of people are using it in our group. And as for the answer to your specific question, Josh, it's really up to you. Listen, if there's a deal you want to get in right now, then you might not have, the time to set this up, et cetera. But if you are thinking about this as a long-term strategy, which this really is only a long-term strategy, right? This is not, this is one of those things that gets better and better over time. It's like his startup business, right? If that's the goal, I would just say, listen, just allocate a certain amount of money there and stick with the plan. Start using it, because it's never going to be a perfect time, right? To start allocating to this as opposed to a deal. And as you know, I'm certainly an advocate for this kind of, strategy. So, anyway, bottom line is, who doesn't want to improve your returns, right? So I think if your long-term goal is to do that, then by all means, at some point you got to pull the trigger on the banking policy. Now, I will say about the Roth thing that comes to mind too is, I'm not, the question of whether you cash out your IRA and stuff, obviously you're going to have some penalties and so on and so forth. One thing that comes to mind that I think is interesting, that some people have used some of these conservation easement techniques to mitigate the tax penalty for basically cashing out Roth IRAs, and actually from converting, regular IRAs to Roth IRAs as well. So that's just as another aside, another kind of a ninja technique that a lot of folks in our group are using. Okay, next question. This is a final question. So it comes from Kenny French. He says, I am currently working with Rod Zabriskie to set up a well formula banking policy. So everything has been going pretty smoothly, with one exception. One of the features that I really like about the life insurance policy is that it offers a way to have money grow that is protected from creditors. I agree with that. It really gives me peace of mind to know that I'll have a good chunk of money set aside for my family that can't, or at least it's very difficult for creditors or anyone else to touch. Looking how to hold a policy in a trust, LLC, personally, etc., I found out that California, where I live, has terrible protections for life insurance policies. Yes, it's true. They only exempt a very small amount, less than $20,000. From the little bit of research I did, it looks like a Nevada trust may be the way to go. Either way, I think this would make for a good podcast topic to do a bit deeper dive into. Okay, so Kenny actually wrote this question. I asked him if I could just read it. And as it turns out, because it's a really good question, okay? And it's something to think about. And I am a California resident as well. And so I wanted to make sure that we did address this. And so rather than try to give you my own, specific, humble opinion on this, I actually consulted asset protection attorney and friend of mine, Doug Lodmell. By the way, if you have not picked up a copy of Doug's webinar on asset protection, it's for free. Go to wealthformula.com, and there's an asset protection webinar on there that he does a really good job, sort of talking from basics to advanced. And Doug is a really smart guy. He's my asset protection attorney. So he writes back. So I wrote Doug and forwarded your question basically, and here's what he wrote back. He said, this is an interesting topic. Life insurance in many states is already a protected asset. So that is the default by which the insurance people sell it. As Kenny states, in some cases, it is not protected at all, like California. In that case, life insurance turns into just an asset like any other and must be put into an asset protected vehicle. What does he mean by that? Basically like an LLC, right? But because it is life insurance, there is an additional consideration of what happens when the policy pays out and how that affects the estate. For that reason, there is also an additional choice, which is an ILIT, I-L-I-T. Otherwise, that stands for Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust. So he created this flow chart for me, but basically, here's the deal. The issue is that since life insurance has a death benefit, which could impact your estate size, this must be a primary driver for where you hold it. We talked a little bit about estate planning in the last Ask Buck episode, so go back and listen to that. But the numbers for estate taxes is pretty high. So, but it will affect a number of you. So bottom line is, continues, if the death benefit will create or increase an estate tax, then the policy should be held by either an ILIT or another completed gift type trust like a dynasty trust. A dynasty trust, for example, a Nevada dynasty trust, as you kind of alluded to. Now, if the death benefit will not affect the estate tax because the total estate is below the exemption, then I would suggest using the asset protection structure to hold the insurance if you are not in a state with good protections. Got it? So basically he's saying that if you're, so if you're first check on your state gives you enough protection, then don't worry about it. If your state does, if your state is not giving you enough protection, and you're not looking at an estate that's going to be basically over 10 million or whatever, then automatically you can go directly and say, okay, you can just put this in an LLC. Okay. Now he goes on to say, it also matters if the insured is using the life insurance as savings vehicle and will need for it for retirement. If so, then it is better in the asset protection plan. And again, this is important, right? So many people in this space, of course, that we're talking about do like the idea of eventually using these funds as a retirement plan. So the LLC ownership or personal ownership, if you don't need the LLC, is really sort of the ideal measure there. Now, he does go on to say, the issue with the dynasty trust is that you are giving the assets away. So if you plan on needing them, this could create a conflict. Also, remember, an asset protection trust can convert into a dynasty trust at death. So this is really the most flexible tool for most clients. Anyway, so that to me sounds like the best, the best possible sort of scenario. And honestly, I kind of wish I'd known about that, because I probably would have done that. I actually haven't had a dynasty trust myself. I use it for asset protection too. So in this situation, it sounds like you could set up an LLC that basically triggers into a dynasty trust upon death, in which case, you don't need it for retirement anymore, right? So, gosh, that's a really good idea. So, what I would suggest is, if that sounds of interest to you, reach out to Doug, because he's the guy to set that kind of thing up. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense, Kenny. It sounds like in your situation, bottom line is, maybe touch base with Doug, or, with another good asset estate planning attorney, and mention this idea that Doug's talking about, which is, okay, I live in California, and, I may have an estate tax issue at some point, 5 or 10 million at some point. Hopefully you do, because that means you're doing well. And say, I want to set this up as an asset protection type LLC that holds the insurance at first, and then I want it to trigger into a dynasty trust upon my death. Good stuff. I learned something there too. So thanks for asking that question, Kenny. Anyway, that is all the questions I have now for the 3 episodes of Ask Buck, 1, 2, and 3. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you got something out of it. And I want to thank you for giving me all those questions, because I think, these sort of, going back and looking at all the information we have and asking questions really helps for people to process the information. So, start asking those questions. Put them on Ask Buck as soon as you have them. You have them now. We may not play them for a couple months, but as soon as you got new thoughts or ups on any of what we've talked about in the last 3 episodes, or in any of the podcasts that will come up, or as time goes by, go to Ask Buck, ask the questions, preferably via, because it's more fun that way. And let's do some, collective learning together through this. Anyway, again, this has been my pleasure. The last 3 episodes, and starting next week, we will go back to a format of me interviewing somebody else for a while. And until then, this is Buck Joffrey with Wealth Formula Podcast, signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast. Visit us on the web at wealthformula.com. The information contained in this podcast are opinions, not fact. As always, consult your own financial team before making any investment. See you next time.